Alright guys, welcome back to another video. So this was a very interesting project to say the least. So at one of the markets I've been attending, beside me there's a vendor who makes bread and a whole bunch of other baked goods. And so he started talking to me about how he wanted a new rolling pin, but he wanted something that he could control the depth of the dough with. Now I've seen this before on Etsy where people will turn a standard rolling pin and then will leave the sides a little bit thicker so that you're going with, 1/8 thickness, 3/8, ½ inch, whatever dough thickness you need. But the problem with that is you end up paying for a new rolling pin every time you need a different depth. So this gentleman's idea was that you would take a standard round rolling pin, mount some wheels or something on the side, and then you would be able to control the depth. So if you didn't have the wheels on there, you just have a nice straight rolling pin, and when you add the wheels on, you'd have all the different depths that you would need. Now, as I said, this was an idea, so it was my job as a woodworker to figure out how to make this come true. So the rolling pin he was looking for needed to be 36 inches long. Now, obviously that is a lot of wood and a lot of time put into something that the idea itself may not work. So I wanted to start out by just making this smaller one. So this one is a little under 24 inches long. I just took a piece of 8/4 white oak that I had sitting around, and I started by turning it into this round cylinder you see here. With the main cylinder turned, I now had to add in a way to actually mount on our outer wheels. So the best thing I could think of was putting in some brass inserts. So it took a little bit of a complex setup on the lathe here between using the chuck, the steady rest, and then a normal kind of drill press chuck on the other end to make sure that I could actually support this piece while drilling into it. Now, like I said, the one I made for the gentleman at the market was going to be 36 inches long, so I had to make sure that this was going to be a nice, stable, and safe platform to do this accurately. And surprisingly enough, it worked out great. This steady rest was able to hold the pin nice and solidly in place so I could drill in far enough to install my inserts. Then if you ever tried to install these brass inserts, you know that they take a decent amount of effort. So it looks like I'm doing it pretty easily here, but I can promise you it took a decent amount of physical effort to actually get these brass inserts fully into the end grain of this white oak. You can see here just how much pressure I have to apply in order to get it to actually bite into that threaded insert. Now after adding in the inserts, the chuck did leave some small marks on the edge of the pin, so I just wanted to do a nice finish sanding. So using the drill press chuck, holding on to the threaded insert, and then using my pointed live center in the back end to make sure that and light pressure to make sure I wasn't damaging the threaded insert. This gave me a nice stable platform to do some light finish sanding just to get those marks that the chuck left behind. Then I finished off the pin by sanding it up to 600 grit and friction polishing it with some normal cutting board wax. The next part of this was making the knobs that would hold our bolts that would then go into the threaded inserts. So the reason I'm adding a knob here, not just adding the bolts into the individual wheels, is just purely to make this a little bit more easier to use. Because all you have to do is just unscrew the bolt, and you can do this with your hands. You don't need any kind of special tool or anything. Now, on this first attempt, I decided to try doing it this way because I found that the live center and the drive center points weren't actually touching each other. Now, if I was to do this again, I would start by drilling a hole the size of our bolt right into the middle of this piece. Then I would mount it on a bolt and hold that in the chuck to make things a little bit more stable. I just found that holding it this way was a little bit awkward to work with at times. Then these knobs were again sanded up to 600 grit. And you have to make sure that the back of them is nice and flat so that they rest tightly up against the body of the rolling pin. And so all I'm doing here is just using some 5-minute epoxy to attach these brass bolts right to the wood. Now again, this being the first iteration, I did learn from my mistakes here. And on the second iteration, I figured out that if I did a little bit less epoxy and then I added in a brass pin to the end there, I would actually lock the bolt in with a little bit more of a traditional joint, and I could use a lot less epoxy so there wasn't nearly as much squeeze out. But then with the bolts fixed in place there, I could mount the knob back in the lathe and do some finish sanding just to clean up all of that epoxy and just polish up that brass on the end of the bolt. The last touch here was using my Dremel to just add a little bit of knurling to the outside of these knobs, because when they were fully sanded up to that 600 grit, they were very hard to grip, but just adding this little bit of texture made it very easy to grip onto them and unlock them. The last part was making the actual wheels themselves. So you can see I've got 3 different sizes set up here, and we're just using some normal flat sawn wood and then turning it the same way we made the knobs. Now the goal here is not that these need to be precise sizes. You know, when it comes to baking, at least as I was told, it doesn't need to be a precision, 3/8, quarter-inch thickness. The most important thing is that they're just the same size. So I'd spent a lot of time really working at these and trying to make sure that, if I was making a quarter-inch one, I made sure that both quarter-inch sizers were the exact same. And then I finished everything off with a little bit of cutting board wax, because I think that leaves the best and best feeling finish overall. So for this rolling pin, I made a quarter-inch, a 3/8, and a 1/2-inch sizes for the spacers, and I found that was pretty good. I also ended up making an 1/8 inch later on for the gentleman at the market, because he said that apparently that is a very common size as well. So this is a style of rolling pin I plan to make it again in the future, but I want to make more of them and actually try and sell them, because I think it's such a cool idea that you can take one tool and just get so many different uses out of it. And I do apologize here, there are no beauty shots, because as soon as I took this to the market, the first one I had it on sale at, it sold very quickly. So the customer was very happy, and I was happy to sell it to him.